welcome to the Tennessee Informer. I'm your host, Dave Vance. Tonight's special guest is Representative Chris Todd, District 73 from Madison County. But before we introduce him, it's time for announcements and updates. You may not have heard about it, but this past weekend, this is unscripted, sorry. For this past weekend, there was a rally downtown Nashville by the Democrat Socialist of America, which Democrat and Socialist, I understand that's redundant in this day and age, but they were having a rally in support of Hamas and the Palestinians. I don't understand how anybody could support Hamas, but it's scary that we've come to that. So just be aware of that. You know, we're hearing now that Hamas is ISIS, and you know, of course, before ISIS, there was Al-Qaeda, and there's been all these terrorist organizations throughout the years. The one thing they have in common is they're all Islamic, so keep that in mind. But to support Hamas after the butchery that they performed last week, I mean, to attack children, to kill women, to kidnap, and to rape, those things, they are subhuman. The people that did that are subhuman. And that would go for the guy this weekend in Chicago who killed a 6-year-old Palestinian child and attempted to kill his mother. Those type of people are, you cannot justify that kind of evil. But we have people right here in Tennessee supporting that, so just be aware of that. Now to our announcements. The Tennessee Eagle Forum Foundation invites you to join them for On Eagle's Wings 2023 Conference and Banquet on Saturday, October 21st at the Embassy Suites Hotel Franklin, Cool Springs. On Eagle's Wings 2023 will feature 12 of the most widely respected speakers addressing some of the most pivotal issues facing our nation today, from the crisis at the border, to the waning influence of America around the world, to the impact of failed economic policy at the kitchen table, to the cultural chaos being unleashed by the left. There's a movement afoot meant to uproot and overthrow the traditional conservative way of American life. We promise you will be informed and inspired by the platform of guests they have assembled. So make plans to join them on Saturday, October 21st to hear 12 incredible speakers, including our guest tonight, by the way, addressing 12 vitally important issues, all in one incredible day. Learn more at tneagleforumfoundation.org. For good conservative talk radio, tune into 105.3 WDXC Radio in Lawrenceburg from 5 to 6 p.m. on Mondays for the Kit Capley Show, and Wednesdays from 5 to 6 p.m. for the local GOP radio show, hosted by Chair of the Lawrence County GOP, Brandon Taylor, and Lawrence Sutton, the Secretary of the Lawrence County GOP. And now on Fridays with Free Speech News featuring Lawrence Sutton and Chris Morris. Chris is the chair of the Giles County GOP and an SEC member. That show airs from 5 to 6 p.m. on Fridays. If you want our state to step up and push back on our overreaching, often unconstitutional federal government, visit TNCSS at Weebly.com and learn more about the nullification legislation we hope to get passed this session. There's no cost, it's an informational site, but we would like for you to click on the Substack tab to sign up. We need as many people as possible to show support for this effort. Please talk to your state rep and state senator now and get their commitment to support this very important piece of legislation. Help put some teeth in the tent. Please spread the word. We're proud to have our guest last week, Paul Engel, endorse our effort and encourage you to visit his site, theconstitutionstudy.com, and have that posted on our TNCS site along with his excellent analysis of the nullification bill, which is House Bill 0726, Senate Bill 1092, posted under the nullification articles tab at tncss.weebly.com. If you have an announcement from a conservative organization you want announced on this show, send the information to tennesseeinformer.tv@gmail.com the Friday before the show. Our guest tonight is Representative Chris Todd. Chris Todd was born and raised in Paris, Tennessee, where we're broadcasting from tonight, by the way. Graduated with a biology degree from Union University and stayed in the Jackson area to start his career and family. Chris and his wife, Melissa, have been married for over 33 years and enjoy their 3 children, 22, 23, and 27. They are both active members of the West Jackson Baptist Church, where Chris serves as a deacon. In 1996, Chris and Melissa founded a private environmental services company, EnviroGreen Incorporated, that services the construction and development industries as well as homeowners in Tennessee and adjoining states. Chris and Melissa have been active members of the National Federation of Independent Businesses for over 13 years, where Chris served on the State Leadership Council. He was chairman for 2 years, the Safe Trust PAC Board, and chaired the Environmental Advisory Council. He also served on the Tennessee Advisory Council on State Procurement. In November 2022, Chris was reelected for a third term to the office of State Representative for House District 73, which covers most of Madison County. He chairs the House Agricultural and Natural Resources Committee and is a member of the Civil Justice Committee, Education Instruction Committee, and Calendar and Rules Committee. He is a member of the UT Commission on Agriculture and is the state chair of the American Legislative Exchange Council, a national association of legislators that provides nonpartisan policy research based on principles of limited government, free markets, and federalism. Representative Todd, thanks for joining us tonight. How's everything going?
Wonderful, Dave. Good to be with you this evening.
Glad to have you. Well, let's get right into the legislation. Last year, you had some wins, had some losses, but most of the stuff you sponsored was very good and necessary. It's unfortunate that some of it was necessary, but one of the first bills we want to talk about is HB 0009, obscenity and pornography. Can you talk a little bit about that bill?
Certainly. We've noticed across the state an effort by certain groups to bring adult entertainment in front of children. And we had this happen in Jackson, Tennessee.
We lost your audio.
What happened?
We lost your audio there for a second.
Okay.
All
okay.
Right. Okay.
Is it back now?
Yeah, we got you. We got you.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Internet glitches, I'm sure.
It happens.
But this local group booked a public park to have a pride event in, which they had done before, but this one was different. They decided on this particular event to have a family-friendly drag show. So you literally have adult men dressed up as women to parade around and who knows what kind of scantily clad clothing and performing what kind of acts in front of children, literally. And so this community rose up and said, absolutely not here, not now. We're going to do something about it. And so we negotiated, we tried to get the mayor to use the power that he had under ordinances that clearly could have prevented this without violating any Second Amendment rights whatsoever. And he absolutely refused. So I and Senator Jackson filed a lawsuit in Chancery Court. We had a number of citizens get behind us and sign on to that lawsuit. And we forced them to go indoors with this and keep it away from children. So it was adults only. And then I started seeing that other communities were dealing with this as well. And so Senator Johnson and I decided to file bills that would deal with this. And we were able to get it passed very quickly in January. And very proud of that and glad that we got something on the books that would force any kind of obscene material like this from being in front of children. It's no different than having a strip club performance literally in front of children. And we all know that for a long time that has been unacceptable and prohibited. And so we wanted to extend that in this realm as well.
Well, let's hope that mayor pays a political price whenever he's up for the election.
Well, unfortunately, he did not.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well.
Yeah, very, very sad.
Yes. Of course, that is a major metropolitan area, unfortunately, and pretty much all of our metro areas are all blue. It doesn't matter where you're at. So do you see having to go back? I mean, I know there was a lawsuit over this, and I think finally I guess, was it a federal court that upheld this law? Or is that a different law that I'm thinking about?
Once we passed the law, these groups always do this. They filed an injunction in Shelby County so that it could not be enforced in Shelby County. And there was a local judge that, I don't remember what exact court that was, but it was on the federal side, that ruled that it is likely unconstitutional the way it's written, and that he was going to enjoin it in Shelby County so that the DA in Shelby County could not enforce it. But the good part is it still remains in effect for 94 other counties, and it is appealed to the Sixth Circuit, and we fully expect to win. This was very carefully crafted so that it would not violate the First Amendment, and that no more than anything else in that obscene world has violated the First Amendment previously. So we wanted to be sure of that and eliminate any possibility of challenges. Matter of fact, one interesting fact, the ACLU was asked to join this, and they refused. They said, no, we don't think it'll be successful, so we're not going to join this.
Wow, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Now, do you know when the court is going to hear it, the 6th District?
It has not been scheduled yet, so we even checked today to check and see if there was any update, and we don't have anything.
Okay. Do you see having to go back and do anything else to this legislation?
At this point, I don't. Again, it didn't actually go as far as I would like for it to go, but we were struggling with, again, making sure that's fit within First Amendment rights, and we didn't violate anything like that. So I wanted to take the current law that we have and just define the word cabaret, and it would have literally shut these things down. I don't care what they were, it would have shut them down, and that I'm pretty confident would have been deemed unconstitutional. So we chose a different path. And we got it implemented as soon as possible. We kept bumping the date up as it moved through the committees. We changed the date and some amendments to make it go into effect much quicker than normal. So we had this thing in effect sometime in early April, I believe, because we got it on the books so fast. And the governor signed it into law, and we hit the skids with it.
Has there been an opportunity for it to be enforced? Has somebody else tried to get by with this since then? Do you know?
I'm sure there are groups that have had these family-friendly drag shows, which, again, as long as they're not nude, they don't have any kind of sexualized activity or simulated sex acts, they're perfectly fine. They fit within the law. But I've not heard of any going outside of that with children present. And so I think they understand this is a very serious matter, and that we've drawn the line in the sand, and they shouldn't cross that line. And I don't think they will. I think they've gotten the message pretty clearly. Well,
good. I appreciate that kind of legislation. Now, you're a big a supporter of the Second Amendment, and we're going to talk about this. That's one of the next bills, and of course, we have one a little further down in the line here. But House Bill 1161. If you want to talk to us about that one a little bit, and what's the thought behind this legislation?
This is kind of an interesting concept that we have in law right now. The immunity for any business or person that has the ability to ban firearms from their location. For example, if Target has the ability to say, you can't bring firearms into this store, anybody having that ability that does not post that firearms are prohibited, they literally have immunity from any kind of liability dealing with, let's say, a shooting that would have happened on their property. And it's interesting because it doesn't spell out that if you do post, that immunity goes away. It's sort of insinuated. And all this bill did was clarify that if you do post, that immunity does not cover you. That's all it did. And we met some difficulty and have not been able to get that passed. And I would certainly like to see this come back. There was some concern that it might affect business liability insurance rates. I really don't think it will. I don't think it would have any more effect on it than any other decisions the business owner makes. But we may do some research and before we run that again and see if we can't get some insurance providers to give us opinions on it.
Okay. So essentially, you're saying just because you post a sign, your sign basically preventing your patrons from being able to defend themselves, and then you're not able to defend them, you're not necessarily off the hook. Is that kind of in a nutshell?
That's it. And I believe that's the case right now. I think the way the law stands as it is today, I believe that is the case. I don't know of a court case that has been adjudicated. But I believe it'd be much more plain and simple for businesses to understand if we wrote that in there, that if you post, then this liability immunity does not cover you.
Okay. School vouchers, that's another big one in Tennessee. I think there's probably been some sort of voucher bill every year for the last, I don't know how many years. And this, of course, is House Bill 0559. And so tell us about that one a little bit.
Well, this was fairly simple and straightforward, and I think kind of a common sense bill. A few years ago, I think it was in 19, we passed the governor's ESA pilot program that applied to Davidson County and Shelby County. And there were some other counties discussed, but those were the two that it applied to get started. We put some money into that so that the most downtrodden children in those communities had an opportunity to go to any school they choose. And then it was immediately challenged in court. Of course, school systems, for some reason, the public school systems generally don't like any kind of bills like this. And it's kind of odd. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't want parents to have choices about what their students experience in a school setting. But either way, it was fought in court and tied up for over 2 years. During that time, a group of those students in those two counties no longer were eligible. They either made other choices or their families did other things that made them ineligible. Once we won the lawsuit, and the state did win, it made them ineligible to accept that ESA money and be able to choose the school of their liking. So all this bill did was said, if you are in that group of students that were legally able to take advantage of the ESAs 3 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago now, then you can do that now. You're grandfathered in. So that's all it was. And fortunately, we were successful in getting that across the finish line. And there are, I'm not sure of the latest number, but I've heard over 3,000 students have been affected by that and are participating in some kind of school choice right now with that funding that we had already provided.
So you expect it'll expand this in the future?
I do. I think that pilot program is, certainly a somewhat of a test project to see just what we would get out of it. What students are we able to raise up and bring out of these failing schools and show some success. And I feel like, matter of fact, it may even be this next year that we see a full-fledged ESA program that would apply statewide. I'm certainly in favor of that. Many other states have gone this route and are seeing success for their students that they've never seen before. And we certainly need to do that in our state. We've got some of the poorest reading scores and math scores in the country, and it's time to turn that around. So if we keep doing what we've always done, we're probably going to get the same results. I think that makes sense. So it's time to make some changes, and I'm glad to be a part of making this kind of a monumental change in our public education system.
So what's being done to address all the different issues in our schools that makes vouchers attractive to so many parents? Because, I mean, there's a reason they're wanting to leave.
Well, certainly. I don't know what's being done to address. I think anytime you create any kind of competition whatsoever, whether it's charter schools, whether it's ESAs that allow kids to go to even private schools if they choose, or to be homeschooled and have some of the costs covered by that. Anytime you create that competition in any system, I believe it's going to make the current system better. So I believe as far as schools go, I believe our public school systems will be stronger. They will be better. They will be more challenged because they want to keep those students in a public school setting. And I grew up in a public school setting. My wife did. We're certainly products of that and have nothing against public education, but things are different than they were when I was in school, quite frankly. The results are a lot different right now, and it's time for, I think the public is demanding that we hold the school system in general, the public school system, accountable and make sure that we get those kids lifted up and in a position education-wise where they can be successful all through the rest of their lives.
Yeah, because, especially you'll have to get a lot more, I think, before there's enough loss there to the private schools and charter schools or whatever to really impact these schools to make the changes that are needed. Because that's what this is all about. I mean, because bottom line is we still have to fund those failing schools. And at this point, especially, most of the state's kids are still in those schools. So, I'm not per se against vouchers, but we still got a lot of kids there. That's still our tax dollars. And somebody still needs to put a boot somewhere and try to get the public schools to make them accountable for what they're failing to do, in my opinion. So a question, who evaluates the schools receiving vouchers and what is the criteria?
Well, at this point, the state has set up a system where there are a lot of criteria that any kind of a eligible school would have to meet. And so that's all vetted through the Department of Education. They meet those requirements, then they're eligible, and then it's monitored. That money flows through the Department of Education for that student. It's earmarked for that student. And this year, when we changed the funding for public education, we basically said there's a certain dollar figure that goes with every single student in this state, no matter where they go. So it's much more easy now to track that and to know what each student has available to them. And so there's already, I don't have all the details in front of me as how that works, but we have a very accountable system so that folks cannot take advantage and spend that money on some things that are not education oriented for their child, their specific child.
Okay. All right, back to Second Amendment issue and back to the special session. House Bill 7064, firearms and ammunition, and that had to do with schools as well. So you want to talk, what was the intent and purpose of that bill?
Oh, certainly. Well, there was a bill moving through the 113th General Assembly earlier this year that because of the Covenant shooting got stalled. We were literally about to pass it on the House floor, and then the Senate was going to take it up. And all of a sudden, we started hearing from the Senate that they were not going to take up any bills dealing with the Second Amendment or guns anymore during this session, this particular year. So I was frustrated at that because this particular bill made some significant changes in the law that allowed certain people to carry in public schools. And I felt like very strongly that it was going to be a significant move toward curing this problem of shooting.
I lost you. Okay, well, whatever you did a minute ago.
Next, said adjourn. I mean,
okay, we're having some
okay. I just
okay. I can't understand what he's saying. Can you hear him, Kevin?
Dave, and now. Are you?
Okay.
Haven't you?
Okay. Well,
can you hear me, Dave?
Okay, I got you now. You still there? Hello? Hello? Okay. Okay. All right. Everybody will hold on. We'll hopefully have Representative Todd back here in a second. We're having some communications issues. Let me back up a little bit while we're waiting for him, and I'll just read over that bill if I can read on this one. Okay. House Bill 7065. It was introduced, allows law enforcement officers, whether on duty or off duty, retired law enforcement officers, active duty and retired members of the armed forces of the United States. Okay. All right. So there's the bill in a nutshell. You can kind of read it for yourself. And hopefully we'll have Representative Todd back with us here in just a second. Okay. I know that whenever you touch this, as soon as you... Okay. Must have been coincidental timing. Okay. So let's back up here just a little bit. Okay. All right. Well, I'll talk a little bit about this bill while we're waiting on Representative Todd to hopefully join us again. Now, this bill was back in special session. And, before they run a bill through a committee, any committee, and I don't recall the exact committee that this one, it failed in the Education Administration during the special session. Now, my understanding is that, he had talked to some of the members on the committee about supporting the bill ahead of time, because you always do that. You don't go cold into a committee without having some support. So you're always going to line up somebody to make a motion to hear your bill, You're going to have somebody lined up to make a second, and you'll hopefully know going into the committee that you have a decent chance of getting it through committee so it has a chance to get to the floor. Most all the bills, good, bad, or ugly, they live or die in committee, okay? So if they don't get through committee, they don't make it to the House floor. Once they make it to the House floor, 9 times out of 10, they're going to pass. Not always, but 9 times out of 10. Well, this bill, I know that he had talked to Scott Sapicki, who was on here, and Scott Sapicki is normally fairly solid on issues, but my understanding is he had agreed to support this bill, and then there was discussion during the committee meeting, and when it was all said and done, Scott Sapicki voted against this legislation. Now, that meant that the bill failed in the Education Committee. Okay, it's not a case of, if a bill goes to committee and let's say it doesn't get a second, or it doesn't get a motion, it's still not dead for that session. But if it fails in committee, it's dead for the session. Now, there are ways that they can bring it back, and I'll have to leave the details of that to Representative Todd if he can covers that, if we're able to get him restored. But okay, all right. So I'll just tell you where I'm at, and you can determine whether or not you want to finish that or if you want to cover different aspects of the bill. But basically, I told them about the special session vote that you had, of course, worked for some support ahead of time in the committee because you never go into these committees cold. And you thought you had the support of a certain legislator. And of course, I did name the legislator, Scott Sapicki. And when it was all said and done, voted against the bill, and the bill failed in the session, which that's really stuck in the craw of a lot of us conservative Republicans, supporters of the Second Amendment, that a fellow Republican would do that to us on a Second Amendment bill. Anything you want to?
I'm sure you went through the details of the bill and what it did, or do you need me to hit? Did you already cover what the bill does?
Not in depth. I'll let you go ahead and cover that. I started to, but I'll let you cover that.
Okay. Well, it allows certain people out, the most trusted members of our community, to carry in a public school. Right now, that's illegal for most of these to carry. For example, we'd have retired and off-duty police officers. We'd have active duty and retired military, and also enhanced carry permit holders. I would argue these are the most trusted members of our community. We've had law enforcement come to us and ask us for this bill. They literally want to volunteer and help protect schools. They're not able to if they're off duty and they're not on a specific call in that school. Also, we've had administrators and folks working actively daily in schools ask for the ability, with their enhanced carry permit, to be able to carry concealed in a school setting. So it basically did that. And like you said, it failed on a tie vote. And of course, all the Democrats on the committee voted against it. And unfortunately, we had a handful of Republicans vote against it as well. And I certainly plan to coordinate bringing this back if the other bill I referred to earlier that Ryan Williams is carrying does not get run or has some kind of issue, then yes, I will be bringing this. I think this is kind of the second best. His had more training requirements and things that made people a little more comfortable. I'm perfectly comfortable with mine. I think that those people are the most trusted in our communities, and we should allow them to carry and protect themselves and those around them anywhere they are, no matter where they are.
Right. Well, now, okay, so it failed, and a bill that fails versus not getting a second or not, there's a difference between a bill failing versus not getting a second, right? In terms of being able to bring that bill back that later in that session. So are you going to have to do something special, if I understand it correctly, because the bill actually failed versus, let's say, not getting a second?
Well, actually, if our special session had been extended and was still going on, that would be the case. But unfortunately, we adjourned sine die from that special session. So every single bill that is not passed into law is dead. It doesn't go anywhere else. It just goes into the archives. And anything like that, like my bill, would have to be refiled in a future General Assembly. So I could file that in January when we go back as a brand new bill in the 113th General Assembly regular session. And then it would go through the normal process. It would start completely over where we are right now. So there would be no difference in just dreaming up a brand new bill in that same session as the position we're in right now.
Okay. Well, that's good in that regard then. The opposition to the bill, it seemed to be, and I did listen to the recording of the committee hearings on that. I watched it, and it seemed to be the fact that there wasn't enough additional formal training or specific. I think they actually wanted them to have post-certification training. Is that accurate?
I would say that probably is, and I didn't hear that many arguments get into details about that. But afterwards, I did hear that some of the members would have been more comfortable had there been some level of specialized training for carrying within a school. And, it's not a bad thing, but again, these are trusted individuals in our community right now. Many of them are post-certified. Many of them are trained, again, in the military. So why would we expect them to need some other level of training? Certainly, if they volunteer to do that, fine. There's nothing prohibiting a local school system from organizing that kind of training with this bill in place as I'd hoped it would be. Not one thing prevents that. But I just didn't want to make it a requirement. I didn't feel like that was necessary, but it certainly would have made a few folks feel a little more comfortable than what they were.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing too, and of course they bring up the kids, which we care about the kids. I've got that. But the people that are in the school and the people who have kids in the school or grandkids in the school and are at an event, I mean, why is it, they're almost saying that, unless you have enough training, you don't have a Second Amendment right in the schoolhouse. That goes for the people who work there. That goes to the parents who come there for a PTA meeting, or they come there for a sporting event or some sort of competition. Grandparents, you name it. So I don't understand why schools are Second Amendment free zones, especially with all of the people that have been killed in the gun-free zones that we've made schools over the years.
Well, Dave, I think the answer to that is for too many decades, folks have thought that criminals obey laws. And you and I both know that they don't. You can make all the laws you want. Criminals are not going to obey them. So if we just magically wave a wand and say that schools are gun-free zones, then the criminals will stay away. Unfortunately, the absolute opposite has happened. We've had law-abiding citizens make sure that they're disarmed to be
Okay, we lost you a little bit there. Okay. All right, well, hopefully we'll get him back here in just a second.
Schools to our children.
Okay, I don't know how much, we didn't hear very much of what you said.
Sorry about that.
But we got you back now. We kind of left off with gun-free zones and how that hasn't worked out so well for us.
Well, folks expected that if we just magically say schools are gun-free zones, that the criminals will stay away. But unfortunately, what's happened is the law-abiding citizens have done exactly what the law said, left their guns at home or in their vehicles, and we now have students as sitting ducks. Criminals have figured that out, and they are intent on doing harm. Many of them obviously mentally deranged, and so they know these are perfect targets for their evil that they intend to commit. And so what we've got to do is put something between that evil and those kids. And every single time, it's a good guy with a gun that stops these people, every single time. So why not make sure that's somebody that's there every single day, every minute of the day, that those kids are in those seats or in those hallways? That just makes sense. It's to me, it's common sense.
Absolutely. And with all the evil out there and with the open borders we have, I would think that the people in our schools, the teachers, and even the parents would want more good people with guns there to protect them and the kids.
You would think.
Yeah. So, Okay, so House Bill 565 deals with limiting local government ability to raise property taxes. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, everybody knows with inflation, like we've been seeing the last couple of years under Biden, especially, that every entity is going to have to raise prices, and that obviously comes down to government, where the government entities are going to have to raise revenue somehow to make sure they can meet the demands of the commitments they've already made. And so what this bill does, it puts a cap on local property tax rates and limits what local governments can do. And it's based on inflation. Any kind of an increase in revenue exceeding the inflation plus 2% has to go to a referendum. And 2/3 of the governing body of that locality has to approve that.
The guest wrote in, and it wasn't in my questions to ask. I know I talked to you offline about it, but anyway, the question for Representative Todd from Tom, and I don't know a Tom. Will Representative Todd support the Nullification Act next year? I know you're familiar with the Nullification Act. I'm sure you heard Representative Halsey give a great presentation on it in committee. And so the question from Tom is, will you support this act if it's brought to the legislature this year, which I know Representative Halsey plans to bring it back.
Good. I'm glad he is. And I'm hearing from this angle from a lot of legislators across the country. I have not gotten into the exact language of Representative Halsey's bill to say 100% support it, but I would say I'm 99% there. That concept to me is something that we're going to have to enact everywhere we can, at every level of government that we can, in order to push back on a federal government that has been given way too much power and way too much of our individual money. So under the Constitution, as it was originally drafted, the federal government's powers were very limited. Its scope was very limited. But states over decades have ceded that authority and that power, that control, in my opinion, very much so too far.
Yeah, I would say to the degree that states are complicit.
To the federal government.
Yeah, I would say to the degree that
Absolutely.
States are now complicit. So yes. Okay.
Yes.
Well, I'm glad that you're 99% there, because if you're 99% there, I'm 100% sure after you read it, you'll be 100% there.
Well, you know how things are in the legislature. You need to read the legislation to make sure you understand all the details. And I want something with teeth in it. I'm not one to just put a show out there and do something just to get a headline. I want something that's going to work. So that's really the caveat I'm giving. I want to make sure there's something there that we've got to put some teeth to it.
Absolutely. And, I'm glad you brought that up, because, and I'm sure you remember this, and I know you voted for it, in 2021, during the whole COVID scam, the House and the Senate, they did a joint resolution, and it was basically in reference to COVID, but it laid out the constitutional argument that, hey, federal government, you have enumerated powers. They are limited. We're still a sovereign state. We retain all those other powers. And if you continue, we're letting you know that we have the right to push back. And oh, by the way, that right is not limited to just taking you to court. We can use our power. We can use legislation to push back. So, and most of the people that signed onto that resolution, House and Senate, most of them are still there. So I guess we're going to find out who meant that and who knew that, okay, it's a resolution, we can talk tough, but we'll never be called to task. Well, now we're calling you to task, okay? We're going to say, look, we want you to put your money where your mouth is. We want this passed, because it lays out several different processes for the state and even at the county level to have a hearing, for the state to have to vote on, hey, is this a violation? And if it is, to take action. But obviously you have to read the bill, and hey, guys out there, bills are kind of like battle plans. They won't necessarily survive the first contact, okay? So what you start off with in a committee, what you file initially, that may not be what you end up with. That's not going to be exactly what you end up with in the end. Sometimes it ends up better. A lot of times not as much, but you know what? Right now we're in such a pathetic shape. if we get any processes passed, that will be an improvement, in my opinion.
I would have to agree as well.
So, all right, so back to the Second Amendment for just a second here. House Joint Resolution 80 is a Second Amendment resolution. You want to fill us in on that one a little bit?
Yes, this is one that I got passed in the House that calls on the Attorney General to challenge any kind of what he determines to be an unconstitutional law or executive order or regulation coming out of D.C., and to file suit to stop that and defend our state from any kind of infringement on the Second Amendment. And so this passed, I believe it was, I think 60, well, no, I don't remember the exact passage on this one. This passed very well, a lot of support on it, and certainly we're seeing an Attorney General now that is not afraid at all to take to task the federal government when they overreach. So we look forward to some significant fights in the future to do that very thing.
So that's a joint resolution. Does that or does that not have any teeth?
It really doesn't. It's an expression of the will of the legislature, and so on the Senate side, we're hoping that it gets moving and that we get it passed this next year before the General Assembly session ends. And so you can certainly contact senators and encourage them to get that passed on the Senate side.
Okay. Of course, if we get the nullification bill, that covers everything then, doesn't it?
And I would hope so.
House Bill 505 allows local partisan elections.
Yes, sir.
And what prompted
this? Well, I carried this bill, a similar bill, a few years ago for school boards. So in most places in our state, the school board elections were nonpartisan by law. And so we passed a law a few years ago that allowed those to be, it was a permissive law. It allowed those school board races to be partisan if a local party wanted to do that. So it's up to the locals whether they do it or not. And of course, with that being a choice on their part and totally permissive, there's no fiscal note, there's no cost associated with that. So I didn't have to go to finance with it. And that can be certainly a death knell if you have to do that. But in this situation, we didn't, and we got it passed, and it became law, and we've had several school boards across the state it actually be enacted or voted in under this law where they were partisan. They had partisan races. And all this does, it puts the same structure in place for local municipal elections, city and county across the state. Some have it, but most do not. And so this just allows the local party to call for a race to be partisan if they so choose. And then they would go through that process locally, just like they do now on other partisan races.
Well, being as this is a very partisan show, at least from my perspective, I think it's, the Democrats have just, there are no sane Democrats left in power, even in our state, from what I can tell. The good one they had, they ran off a couple years ago, that being Mr. DeBerry. So at the local level, I think it's worth laying out the differences in what the platforms are between the Republicans and the Democrats. And since our schools are so important, and since that's where all the indoctrination is happening, I think it's a good thing to have partisan school board races. And, then you can raise the question, candidate so-and-so, do you support what's been going on in our schools, what's been allowed to happen? Now, having said that, our schools are largely controlled by our state. Not quite to the degree that they would necessarily have you believe on every case, because I know the schools and the state play off against each other. Hey, that's a local decision. Hey, that's a state decision. And sometimes the parents and the locals don't really know who's lying about that and who's not. But the bottom line is the state constitution requires the state government to fund, I think, something like 70% of the funding. Now, I guess that changed under the new funding scheme that they came up with. But the bottom line is, most of the garbage that's in our schools today and impacting our kids and impacting future generations, okay, it comes from the federal government, and we'll talk about that. But, we've got enough problem at the state level. Our governor appointed the Department of Education, penny not worth a penny Schwinn, when he first got in there, who had been a mess at Texas. He appointed her. All the garbage that she allowed and or pushed, on our state Department of Education. And then, of course, I can't remember the lady who he's hired since Penny Schwinn left, but she's apparently as far left and loony as Penny Schwinn was. So our state is, in my opinion, responsible for a lot of the stuff in our schools. What are your thoughts on that? And why can't, when we pass laws, why can't we seem to enforce them when it comes to school stuff?
Well, there's a basic framework that the State Department of Education hands each district to say this is the framework you need to work within. There are a number of choices within that for curriculum and other things that the local school boards are appointed to decide and pick and choose what they want for their particular district and their part of the state. So I think because of the investment that the state taxpayer dollars are put in, we've got so much invested in education in the state, in public education, and every single individual is paying into that. Our tax dollars go for that. So we need to make sure there's accountability, and we want some uniformity across the state, some basic uniformity of what's going to be taught and learned. And so from that standpoint, we get the basic framework, but then the locals can pick and choose what type of curriculum they want within that framework. And that's where this issue is so important, because those school boards are making those decisions. They're enforcing those types of principles on the local school teachers and principals and students, and that's their job. So having those as a partisan race, in my opinion, is more of a truth in advertising to me. So if you have a Republican running against a Democrat, then some basics about those people without even asking them questions. If they identify with the Democrat Party, that tells you a lot about that person right now in this day and age. Yep. And so it's just a truth in advertising for me is what it's about. But I want to leave that up to the local parties. There's certainly districts in this state where that's not necessary, and let the locals decide that, whether it's going to be partisan or not. I think that's a reasonable way to do that.
Right. I guess my thought is, and I agree with what you said, but my thought is, I don't know that there are decent, what we would consider decent framework options being handed down from the state. That's my concern. And I also have a concern that I know, for instance, the CRT bill that was passed a couple of years ago, well, it was ultimately left up to Penny Schwinn to enforce. So you're not going to get a whole lot of enforcement from somebody like Penny Schwinn. So I still have those concerns that the garbage that's in our schools, our state has a lot of responsibility for. Yes, the locals too. I'm all for highlighting it with partisan school board elections. Now, we get a lot of junk from the federal government, and Speaker Sexton has floated the idea of not taking any more federal funds, which I am all for, not taking any more federal funds. It's not a federal responsibility. It's not a federal power. It should be only state. It used to be that way. Do you think he's serious, and do you think we can make that happen at least in the next couple of years?
Well, I think he's very serious, and I do think it will happen if this committee brings back the information that I think they will, that shows what kind of strings are attached to those federal dollars and how they're different from the values that we have in the state. So I think once that's established, and then we look at what that funding really involves, on a state level and the local level, then I believe that decision can be made much more reasonably than I could make it right now, because I don't have all the facts. What are the effects going to be in 1 year if we do that? Okay, well, what if we reduce it by some amount? I don't even know if that's an option or not. So I'm anxious to hear what this committee actually discovers through their process. And I applaud the speaker for setting this up. I think it's a good conversation to have. Many people across the state have been talking about this for some time, and I'm glad he's taken this on as an issue to really assess and drill down to the detail level and know for sure whether it's the best thing to do.
I'm going to say, this is just my personal opinion, I don't care what it costs us to get rid of the federal influence, the federal chains. It's worth it. That's my opinion. And here's the thing too, if it goes back to the states the way it should be, then the state has no more excuse for why we got garbage in our school system. in my
Oh,
opinion.
you're exactly right. You're exactly right. There is a counter argument to this that I hear every once in a while, and that is, well, my tax dollars are going to the federal government, and if we don't take and all of these, and this is for the COVID money and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
If we don't take those dollars, then they're going to California and New York, and that's certainly a valid argument. Obviously, you and I both know that really we're working on borrowed money more than we are raised revenue right now, and with the ridiculous spending levels that our Congress and president have been cramming down our throats for the last several years, and this is both parties doing this.
Yeah.
That has got to be reined in. We've got to get back to a balanced budget sooner than later, or this country is going to sink financially.
Yeah, right now the states are all tethered to the Titanic, okay, and just waiting for it to go down. So we kind of need to cut that rope, and I think the sooner the better. And if the argument is, well, somebody else will get it, I mean, that kind of reminds me of what the school lawyers always tell the school districts when some weirdo wants to force something on everybody. Well, if we don't do it, we'll just get sued. Well, if your standard is you'll get sued, then you'll never stand up for anything. And if your standard is if we don't spend it, somebody else will, then you'll take the money every time. I mean,
certainly. So, you're right. I'm just saying that's one of the arguments that I've heard.
Yes.
And I think the good outweighs the bad in this situation to probably cut back and eliminate that federal influence altogether.
Absolutely. House Bill 1163, it defined health share ministries to protect them. So let's talk a little bit about health share ministries. I think I know what that is.
Well, there are some options for folks out there that are called healthcare sharing, and usually they're faith-based. I think probably most all of them are. And under the IRS code, they're allowed to exist and provide what it kind of functions as insurance, but it's technically not insurance. So we had to put some definition in state law to make sure that those could still operate in the state and not be hurt or damaged. Fortunately, I have a little knowledge about this because for several years, my family participated in one of these when our regular commercial insurance policy went sky high for no apparent reason. I think Obamacare was probably the stimulus for that, and it just was unsustainable. So to continue some type of healthcare coverage for our employees, we chose to go with one of these health share ministries. And what it is you're paying in a set amount of money every month as a share. The one we participated in operates this way. So you pay in a set amount of money for your family, and then they pool that money, and out of that pool, then bills are paid. We found that our providers were paid probably in 50% or faster amount of time that they were getting paid through the commercial insurance carriers. And this ministry negotiated prices. They negotiated networks very similar to commercial insurance, but they just don't operate as insurance. So it's and some of these, quite frankly, and I don't really care for this angle, but some people really like it. Some operate where you literally learn every month what needs are out in the ministry group you're a part of, and you send a check to a provider on behalf of an individual person for your share that month. So let's say John Doe had $1,000 bill at a provider, then I and several others might learn about that on a monthly basis, and I would send my $500 to that provider to cover part of his bill, and someone else would do the same thing. And they organize that some way so that it's not overpaying or anything like that. It works very, very smoothly. But anyway, we just put this into place to make sure that those continue to operate and provide that service for those folks that are parts of those ministries.
Okay, well, that sounds, I think a lot of people might be interested in that. At least it'll be available to them after you guys get it all hashed out, so that's good. And House Bill 562, military pay?
Yes, we were learning, matter of fact, I think it was probably last Christmas. I was at a local National Guard armory and learned from a group that were about to deploy. I learned from just a casual conversation with one of their commanders that one of the biggest challenges they have is once they deploy, a number of their members are more or less living paycheck to paycheck. and there's a delay in their first check based on what day they leave, what day of the week they leave, and they're deployed, and they have to basically work that pay period. Let's say it's 2 weeks. Then their pay request goes in that they've already worked this 2 weeks. And so in 2 more weeks, they'll have that direct deposit. So they're literally going a month sometimes without pay. And these commanders and their officers loan them money. They try to do what they can to help. But I mean, they just can't help everybody. And I said, well, that just doesn't make sense. If we're deploying these folks, taking them away from their paying jobs, we need to take care of them. We owe them the money. Let's get it done faster. And so I worked with our human resources folks in the Department of Human Resources, or work with military. And we basically got this structure to where there was a certain type of pay system already in place. And we just had to pass a fairly simple law that allowed this group of individuals when the Guard members are deployed to access that pay system. And so basically when they deploy, the day they deploy, their pay goes in as a request so that they get about a 2-week jump on it, and it makes it much more reasonable. So hopefully when their last check comes from their current employer, then within a few days or week, then their next check coming from the military, from the state of Tennessee, is right there in their account. And their families aren't having to struggle. They're not having to struggle and meet their payment needs.
Well, that's good, because that definitely needs to happen. It's hard enough as it is. Make it worse by putting that kind of burden on the family. So I'm glad.
Well, and this commander didn't even realize that he was expressing to me a concern that I might actually deal with. He wasn't asking me to do anything about it. But when I learned of that concern, and I've actually been helping a local group that's raising money for veterans and our active duty military, probably more active duty than anything, to help out when they are deployed. So if their spouse calls and their refrigerator went out, then they've got somebody to call and say, hey, well, we've got a pool of money over here that we've been raising throughout the year to help you out. So I was already working with them, and part of their mission is doing this very thing, kind of filling that gap of pay. And it was really straining them. So I was more than happy to carry this. And I think all of my colleagues were thrilled to be able to pass this and help those folks that we're calling on to serve on our behalf.
Absolutely. Well, that's some good legislation and very needed. House Joint Resolution 5, term limits for Congress. I know a lot of people support this.
Yes, sir. It is overwhelming support in our communities. And this is a resolution that's part of the process laid out in our U.S. Constitution, whereby states have the ability to amend the Constitution of the United States. And in Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, it lays out a process. So when I believe it's 34 states, with the number of states that we have now, call on Congress with their individual resolutions for a particular type of amendment, and this one dealing with term limits, then Congress shall set a time and a place for a convention of the states to take place. And in that convention, they would discuss the proposed amendment. And if then 3/4 of those states, if they pass that out of the convention, it goes back to the states to ratify. If 3/4 of those states ratify that, and I think that number's 38, if I remember correctly, I don't have my notes in front of me, then it becomes part of the U.S. Constitution at that point. Now, in this situation with term limits, I don't really expect us to ever get to 34 states to call for a convention, because I don't think our legislators in D.C. really want states and citizens setting their limits. So they're probably going to come up with their own term limits before we get to that 34 states. But we want to force them to make that choice and to go through that process and amend the U.S. Constitution in that way, so that we can have some level of limit on the tenure that so many of these have in our U.S. Congress.
So you believe that you can, if you have a convention of the states, you believe that you can limit it to that topic, and that it wouldn't.
I know we can. That's what the Constitution says.
Okay. I guess we have a little different read on a convention of the states, but in any event, on term limits, I will say this. I think that, number one, we have them already. They're called elections. Unfortunately, most people don't pay attention except at election time. I don't know. I'm not saying it'll be a bad thing. I don't know that it's going to accomplish what people think it's going to accomplish. especially at the federal level, because we already have a problem with the bureaucracy up there. And if you have a constant turnover, that bureaucracy is going to fill in more of that power vacuum because they're the knowledge base, good, bad, or ugly. Now, we probably need, I think civil service reform would help a whole lot, personally. But anyway, I know it's a very popular issue as far as term limits. I just personally am not convinced that it will do necessarily what we think it will do. But hey, get it passed, it can't hurt. It can't hurt.
Those are some good points.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I will say on that
Absolutely.
is there are people that I would hate to see not to be able, more at the state level than at the federal level. There's very few at the federal level. I'm like, yeah, keep this guy there. There's not too many of them, but there are so few of them. I would kind of hate for some of them, the few, to get termed out because I'm like,
I understand that. And on the state level, I have questions quite often. Say, well, are you also sponsoring legislation that would put term limits on yourself and on your colleagues on the state level? And I'm not, because I have personally seen how absolutely any member of the Tennessee General Assembly can be voted out in a very short period of time with very little money. But on a federal level, the money is so different.
Yeah.
You're talking about, if I thought about running for Congress, there's no way I would even consider that if I didn't have at least $1 million committed to me, hard committed. It's going to take more than that, but that would have to be some seed money to get started. And as you've seen with a number of these races, a lot of out-of-state influencers come in a state like Tennessee that they know is such a conservative stronghold, and they will try to water that down with millions and millions of dollars to put us in a position where those uninformed voters choose somebody that really doesn't represent their best interest.
Yeah, and I would like to see restrictions on out-of-state money. Now, that's the thing that really irritates me, is whether they're at the state level election or you're talking out-of-state money should flat out be illegal. If you don't live in the district, if you don't live in the state, you got nothing to say about it. And to me, I'm sure that's probably considered by our justice system as a violation of the First Amendment. But to me, that's not a violation of the First Amendment. You shouldn't have any influence on elections that don't directly impact you. And I understand they all are part of something that impacts us all, but that's the problem, or one of the problems, in my opinion, is being able to contribute money to other candidates in other states and out of districts. So I think we certainly need to look at that as well. Well, hey, I really appreciate you coming on this week, and I'd love to have you back sometime.
I'd be tickled to. Really enjoyed this.
So if you've been enjoying our program and the content we bring your way, be sure to click on the like button and let us know. Don't forget to hit subscribe to stay tuned for the episodes to come. Your support means a lot to us. As we look ahead next week, mark your calendars and get ready for an episode you won't want to miss. We're thrilled to welcome Karen Van Wyck from Mass Resistance to the show. She's actively engaged in the battle against obscenity in the Tennessee School Library, and her insights are bound to be eye-opening. Your presence next week will make our discussion even better. Together we can make a difference. Once again, can't thank you enough for being part of our community and for joining us in this journey to inform more Tennesseans of what's going on out there. Your enthusiasm and support motivate us, and we look forward to having you with us for many more days in the future. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.